Hello, everybody. May I have a little bit of your attention for the next 50 minutes. Basically, I'll try to make it in less than 50 minutes. And my name is Vadim Belman. I wouldn't tell where I work and how I work. It would tell you nothing. The main point of my presentation is that I worked for Foswiki community over the last 3 years. And I'm the one and the only one who is responsible for adapting all the Foswiki code for new requirements for the new world. First of all, I would like to ask if anybody of you doesn't know what Foswiki is. Okay, makes sense to explain. So obviously, it's a wiki. And I think you would hear this word obviously quite a couple of times, but sometimes it's, good to hear things again and again. It's written in Perl, obviously, again. And what's more important about Foswiki is that it's not just a text platform. It's not just wiki. It's a full-grown platform itself, which means it's possible to write simple applications in Foswiki, and there is such term application, and it has plugins to support those applications. And plugins, to my point, it's both the most powerful and the weakest point of Foswiki as it is now. It's extremely good for intercorporate usage, especially for mid-sized businesses, where you can have one common place to handle all your documentation, discussions, task management, database editing, a lot of other stuff. Actually, if you follow the link above, you can read much more about use cases. And I would like to move on and tell the most important thing of this speech. So, what's wrong about Foswiki in its current state? Why I needed to redesign it? So, the biggest issue is that it's old. Let me remind to those of you who knows about Foswiki is that it's a fork of TWiki. And TWiki itself, actually soon it's going to be 20 years exactly as TWiki started. 23rd of July is the date of birth. And TWiki started just a couple of scripts, CGI scripts, loosely bound together with some libraries. And that's probably the source of all problems we have currently, because there was no initial design to the system. It was growing and growing and growing. More particularly, very eclectic source code, which is a mixture of procedural and object-oriented techniques. And wait a second. It's not just a mixture, but the problem is that procedural actually is the controlling layer, and objects are simply supporting procedural approach, and it causing some issues. Heavy reliance on begin blocks, it's where it once started with, we have a little bit of a problem, let's fix it. Begin block would do just nice, a couple of lines. I'll tell you a little bit later what it ended up with. Another issue, it's a particular issue, but it causes a lot of confusion. Session is the central object of Foswiki, but it's not the session you might think it is. It's current session from the moment the request comes to the web application until a response is generated to the user. This is the session, not a user session. And it causes some confusion. And it's also confusing people that it's located in plugins module for some reason. Why? Simply because at some point somebody needed it, they put it there, and since then it's the central object of Foswiki. It's global. When it's global, I think no need to explain what it means. I mean, you cannot localize it properly. And if you need more than one request processing per process, for example, for WebSocket handling, no way, guys. Forget about WebSockets. Plugins, as well, as I told, they have some weak point, but I'll get back to that a little bit later. Again, those are some bad design about plugins. And as a result of the above issues, it's not very easy to scale Foswiki on any big level. Like if you want a cluster, you most likely would need your data to be stored on a network. And database is the best location for that data. And there is no way to have data stored in database for many different reasons. And so on, so on. When I came to those conclusions, which I just told you about, sorry. I just came to the community. First, my question was, guys, can we have plugins in objects? No, how? Okay, we have other problems, but how to fix them? Nobody wants to speak about it. Okay, do we need to convert the core to object model and move on from that point? Oh yes, this is what we need, and everybody agreed that Foswiki has to get rid of procedural approach and convert to complete object-oriented approach. So I already told you about how it started to me. First of all, I used Foswiki for my own purposes, and this is what helped me to work on it. I mean, in this section, I would like just tell a little bit that any one of you would decide at some point to work on a project as old as Foswiki and work for community, you need some reasoning to do it, because otherwise you will start, you waste your time, and then you may end up with nothing and no will to continue. So here I would like to tell you what you need to work and work and work. First of all, of course, use the project. It won't work. It's obvious, I mean, but still. And have the primary target. This helps a lot. I wanted better plugins. This was my target from the beginning, because the current plugins model doesn't satisfy me. Enough time also. It might be obvious. But I must admit that I spent 2.5 years of my spare time on finishing that project. And actually, it's not finished yet. And maybe don't get too experienced. Just don't. Because if you got too experienced with the project, with its internals, it means you're used to the way things are done in it, and you won't be willing to change them. Just be unsatisfied. When you're inexperienced, you're unsatisfied. Everything is bad for you. So go on. Next step, I wanted to talk about the community, the people I met, how we interacted and stuff like that, but then I decided it takes too much time, and to hell with it. Skip it. Because anyway, situation within each community might be pretty much different from what I met, so my experience might be completely useless here. And let's go to technical stuff then. So, once again, what's wrong? Yeah, you know, I would like to tell you one thing. Even though I'm telling you what's wrong about Foswiki, what's bad about Foswiki, and so on, keep in mind that I'm speaking about particular core design. Foswiki itself, as a project, is simply the greatest thing I ever used for my purposes. It's fantastic. I mean, it works. It's simply when you see the face is beautiful, but then you know, look behind the face, and you have terrible hair there, it's fixable. Nothing really unfixable in this world. So, as an example of how terrible the, how to pronounce it, heredity of Foswiki, I mean, how it suffers from old bad decisions. Let's have a look at how the web application starts. In every CGI script, and Foswiki is still handling every request with a separate script, CGI script. Every script contains those 3 lines: use Foswiki UI, $Foswiki engine start. Well, it sounds good. Engine start, zoom, boom, 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 boom. And we run then. But 1 second, where do we get engine from? That's a question. And we start checking out, and we find a begin block of 472 lines of code where the engine gets initialized within this begin block. I mean, pretty. Then engine run method It creates request response pair and passes them to handle request, another stage. Why? What for? Okay, sounds good, handle request, but and another module for that purpose. By the way, the begin block is located, in Foswiki I wrote it. Handle request gets the those requests dispatched. But then another question arises. Guys, remember about the central object, about the session? Where? It gets created within handle request, but not directly, but in a private method execute, which nobody knows about. You can see, I mean, there was no bad intention from anybody, but a lot of people worked on the project from the beginning, and it caused this pretty messed up code. So session, this I told about, sorry. Another issue about the session object is that even though it's central, it doesn't control anything or almost anything. Instead, it's been controlled by other code. Other code manipulates it, sets attributes, changes values. Even some modules using it as a storage for their session data. I mean, they simply come and say, okay, session object, you are a hash. Okay, that's great. Here is my key and stores this data for me. What if anybody else using this key? Who cares? You know. And plugins. Currently, plugin is a package, module package, whatever you call it, with a set of functions with predefined names used as callbacks. Nothing less, nothing more. You see, the only mechanisms you have to control the data, your data, so whatever package is providing to you. That's all you have within a plugin. And this is why I wanted to change it. And no plugin can change how the core acts. I'll later show why this is important to me. So, what we start with? First of all, of course, it's planning. Before I started doing any coding, I defined it, well, first of all, I named it Foswiki version 3, because current version is, major version is 2. Then I defined targets, what I want eventually of the code. Multi-instance, multi-domain, everything for scalability and clustering in the future. Clean up the code, obviously. Remove those begin blocks, terrible begin blocks. And my dream, new plugins. Well, eventually, anyway, we are programming for fun, most of us. I don't know, somebody probably do it for money, but we have fun of it. And you know, when you have such an eclectic code, which causes you some headache to do simple things sometimes, well, it's not really much fun. So I wanted to have things straightened out and easier and more fun. Hopefully I managed, but I don't know yet. The initial planning consisted of choosing what frameworks to use, primarily. We choose more by a number of factors. First of all, it's fast and it's not a memory hog. Because Moose is too slow and Foswiki still relies on CGI pretty heavily. People were complaining that Moose is takes too much to start up a script. Mouse, too much of memory hog. Anybody doesn't know how Moose organized? Okay, that's great. Exception handling, we needed to switch from error.pm to something else, and it was my decision, not community decision, to choose try-tiny and throwable, but you know, this is really good. Then I needed class hierarchy in first place, and I needed object hierarchy. So, as to the class hierarchy, how it happened. I hope it's some fun, the process. Well, I started with core class. Any object within the system must inherit from this core class, because this is, first of all, for unification of all code across Foswiki. Actually, it's another problem. A lot of people put their hands on it. So code is pretty much stylistically diverse. So every class inherits, this is a sample class. Then we change the approach. Where it was procedural, we switch to object-oriented, and now we switch to application model. So we have an application, we need a central object, which would be application. And the problem of Foswiki, because it's so much relied on one central object, we need, every object within Foswiki would need to know about that central object. So the easiest way was not to make object, the root class, demand the application to be existing because it's not always necessary. But easier to have a role which would declare that this particular class requires and can only exist within an application environment and nowhere around. For example, Foswiki configuration, it's a new class I introduced. And this is a good example. If you look into the code, it's a good example of how application app object role is applied. But then we always have this but. We have exceptions as well, and this particular exception, it would pretty much benefit from knowing about the application, because then it can use response object to generate valid error response for a user. But it cannot require the application because it's an exception. It must be able to exist outside of this environment. So my solution was, okay, let object know that application could exist. So the role loses its primarity here, and now we have two places where application is defined. Not the best design, but unfortunately, due to some limitations of old Foswiki code, I had to come to this design. So this was my plan initially. And this is what I ended up with. Life is not that simple as we planned it. Now, tests. Again, obvious. To many, this is obvious. But for those of you who might be not that much experienced with coding and changing old code and stuff like that, we always have tests, especially old tests, because this is what helps us to keep backward compatibility. I'm sorry. And the problem with backward compatibility is that when you start communicate with people within the development community, there would be a lot of complaints that your new design is breaking the backward compatibility. Users are going to be unhappy. That's going to be a problem. Unfortunately, complete backward compatibility in case of Foswiki wasn't possible whatsoever, simply because, switching from plain object design where we refer attributes as keys on a hash object to MOOS, for this case, approach, where attributes are represented with methods. Simply there is no way to have this compatibility, backward compatibility. But you can maintain it at reasonable level, where changing, for example, old plugin code would require, like half a day at last with testing. But to keep this high level, you need tests, absolutely mandatory. Again, to some of you it's obviously, but I would like to remind it. What's more important is that tests you write, this is part of your plan. This is backbone of your plan. If you do a new code, first plan it in the tests, see how you want it to work, and then actually create code which would fulfill those tests. That's the only good way. Otherwise, you will end up with huge mess. As I already told you, application was the new central, is the new central object. Not only it's central object, but it's now in full control of everything, or almost full control. There is no code which is allowed without extra need to manipulate, to mangle with application data. Only by asking application. Everything must go through it. Application itself has to be absolutely self-sufficient, no dependency on globals from other modules, nothing. I mean, if you imagine it as a real-life object, and here you lies your code, okay, your objects, and you get application object and make it like this, move it to another place and drop it there, it must work as it worked before. I mean, completely self-sufficient. If you have any external ties, you won't get good level of scalability. Well, obviously, again, no more beginning blocks for initializing except absolutely necessary to initialize a package. Only a package could be initialized with begin block. No objects could be created with it. So it's all done by application and by frameworks to which it delegates this job. Application is the single point of entrance now. And the biggest outcome of this change is that Foswiki is now capable and now works with PSGI, which is absolutely must for a modern Perl application, web application. And also, previously, there is no, if some of the code loses an exception, simply dies. The exception could be lost. And user would get simple, 500 error, and that's it. There is no more thing like this. Application is the last resort for taking care of lost exceptions, and it has to represent any error in meaningful way so that user could at least, grab a screenshot and show it, present it to a developer, and tell them how it happened. And of course, application has to be a glue for other frameworks. That's, again, life is more complicated. Unfortunately, legacy plugins are still there. We cannot get rid of them. Foswiki has around 300 plugins. Out of them, at least 150 most definitely are used by somebody. We cannot simply drop this baggage. So we need to provide some level of backward compatibility. What I've done, the biggest problem with those plugins, not that they're packages in their nature, but that they rely on globals. So I had to replace session with Foswiki app global. Configuration object, I didn't tell you about this, but it exists, it doesn't matter. But where previously it was just a hash, just it exists. It was created somewhere. For now, it's a hidden reference to data on configuration object. So you can only read from it. You don't have to change it. It's only for plugins. And my best love Foswiki engine is gone now. Nobody needs it anymore. So we only have left with two global variables necessary to provide all plugins with something to hook with and to continue working. And it's much easier to have those two localized if you switch contexts. I mean, if you have two applications working within same process and sharing same memory, if you switch from one application to another, all you have to do is to replace content of those two variables. And it's much easier to comprehend than do something about the old approach. And the primary requirement, no new code is allowed to use those globals. That's it. I mean, that's prohibited. My dream. Finally, I would like to show you what it all came with. Plugins. Well, the new plugins are objects, and okay, sorry, I just broke the sequence. Anyway, their objects, but unfortunately, currently the name plugin is already occupied in Foswiki, so the new framework had just renamed it to extensions. Another reason to use extensions name is that they are much more than the old plugins, because they really now capable of extending, really extending Foswiki functionality. That I told about. Sorry. Totally raw. Okay. New extensions can operate in 3 different modes. Cooperative mode. This is how the old plugins are working actually. This is where your code, you simply install a callback, and the callback is getting called by somebody. There is no initiative on your side whatsoever except for setting the callback. That's it. You have no control. Somebody come and ask, I'm going to do this operation. Would you provide me with some additional information for that? That's all. Semi-cooperative is a little bit more, active mode of operation, where extension is capable not only to install the handler, but the handler itself can do much more than simply answer to a request. It can change the way the core executes. It can prevent some methods from execute and so on. I'll show it a little bit later. And the most powerful, but probably this mode would be used less than other two, is subclassing. Subclassing is where you can change any core class of Foswiki with your own, or inherit from it. So with all these 3 modes, it's actually possible to change anything, just anything within Foswiki core. For example, currently I introduced you with Foswiki config class, and currently it stores configuration data in a plain file. But if I want clustering, I want a database. And it took me 450 lines of code, including documentation and license information, to write an extension which changes Foswiki config and redirects all the configuration data to a database. 450 lines of code. That's it. And basically, there is nothing what would prevent your extension from using all those 3 modes simultaneously, depending on what do you want. Since I don't have much time left, I would like just demonstrate you finally how the most, oops, sorry. Okay, I'll try to work it this way. Sorry, my pen just disconnected. I wanted to use it. So this is semi-cooperative mode where we install handlers. Okay, much better. Where we install handlers on a method. So I used some fake core class and some method within it. For those of you, and all of you know how moves work, it looks pretty much similar to how inheritance and method overriding works in moves. Simply different keywords. Plug before, so before method gets called, around, which can actually substitute method call, and after, which can adjust any return value and so on, so on. What makes things different here is that, since it's a method, we expect it to be called on an object. And we expect that this would point to that object. Not in this case, because currently I'm talking about ExtensionCentric model. So this here, this is extension object. This is your own object. So you can work with your extension data easily without having anything. It's not always that you have to know about the object on which the method gets executed. But you always would need your extension data. Most likely you will need it. So if you need to reference the Foswiki object you are dealing with, we have params data here. And it contains a key object, which you can use for that purpose. It's pretty easy. I don't show it here. What's more important about the params? It's the same hash which gets passed to absolutely all method handlers, whether they are coming from your extension or they are coming from other extensions. So this object can be used as a message passed between handlers. Look at this code. We simply store some data we would like to use later. Then we use it later. And if you see, it's randomly it sets different strings. And if you find do it, we do something within it. We do it in another handler. So this way, we can have some information which would pass through all the stages of method execution within extensions framework. Actually, okay. No, it's important. Actually, the process of executing handlers I call execution flow. Because, you know, it's like everything flows from one handler to another, to method, then to another handlers, and then it comes out to user with some response from the method. And if you look now here, you see there are some specially handled keys on that params. And in this case, RC represents return code, you know, common notation for that purpose. What is stored in RC is going to be returned to the user, which called some method. So as you can see, and actually before and around can also manipulate arguments. You can see it in error here. So as you can see, you can change any aspect of behavior of Foswiki even this way, by changing arguments that are passed to the method and by replacing the return value the way you need it. But even more than that, what is important in this execution flow? Differently from how it's done with inheritance in Mu and Moose, begin, around, and after, it's not you who is passing the execution to other methods. Like, you know, with Mu, you use first argument, which is original method code reference, and when you need it, you call this original code method if you need, when you need it, if you need it. It's not like this here. Extension framework, extension manager, takes care of the whole system, and it is the manager who calls every handler. Okay? And since there is, of course, obviously, there is some order of extensions, I mean, we can always say that this extension goes first, this extension goes second, and so on and so on. This is the order how our handlers are called. And if we throw this exception, it's not a fatal exception. It's a helper extension. And what it tells to extension manager is that we have to stop here and now. No other handlers, no method would have to be executed. And use RC to use this return value here. This will be used as the return value from the method. Yes?
I think you have a bug in that code. Do you literally want key named underscore underscore package underscore underscore, or do you want it to be the current package?
All those handlers, they are physically located in an extension.
Right.
So it would be extension package.
Right.
So,
to get an actual package as an argument in the plus.
I use it as an ID, so It's a kind of private namespace within params hash.
That's really confusing. Thank you.
Sorry, if you come later, I would explain you. There is nothing confusing in it. It's not, okay. Ладно. Okay, sorry, I lost my track, but that's probably all I wanted to show you. I mean, with those, as I told you about the database configuration extension, the whole extension is built using this approach. So I simply took a couple of methods from Foswiki config responsible for writing and reading data and replaced them with my own handlers. And that's it. And you know what makes things really great here is that this way you can have configuration stored in more than one location, for example. When somebody would write an extension for storing topic data in a database, he also might use this approach to override store class and to have topics stored both in database, on a disk, whatever you like it. I mean, it could act as a filter where data gets through and gets stored whenever you like. You can do anything with it, absolutely anything. And surely there is subclassing, which is even more powerful. But as more powerful, it's about more responsibility as well. So it has to be used with some certain level of care. Subclassing works a little bit tricky too. The point is that within my model, no Foswiki object could be created using new. There is a special method on the root class called create, and this method has to be used, always has to be used to create new objects. Now, what happens? Okay, don't have much time left. Here is a sample extension which wants to inherit, to override a class within Foswiki. Foswiki config again. So this is the way it works. With Ext class, with Ext class, we just say, pretty simple and straightforward. Nothing terrible. And after that, extension manager does not interact with us anymore. Everything we do is using typical Mu inheritance techniques. But how do we replace the class? And this is the trick I used using create. When create is requested to create an object of Foswiki config class, first thing it does, it checks if our object knows about an application. If there is an application, it goes to application, gets access to extension manager, which belongs to the application for that purpose, and it asks from extension manager, do you know if there is a replacement for this Foswiki config class? And in our case, the extension manager says it's the only role it takes in all this procedure. It says, yes, here is new class you must use to create the object. So eventually, if you take a note of use Foswiki role, our substitute class is not a class, but role. But for those of you who dealt with plugin toolkit, I think it's not something new. I mean, I have invented it on my own, and it turns out that use of roles is the best way to inherit within Mu paradigm. But that's the way it is, and it works. And what's good about subclassing is that here there is no limitation. The limit is only the sky. You can do anything you want. And another good thing about it is that it's much faster than use of handlers, of course. Because where extension manager is involved, where it does a lot of job of sorting, calling handlers, substitution, substituting things and stuff like that. Here we have plain inheritance model. That's it. So basically, that's pretty much I wanted to tell you about my experience. Frankly saying, I even fit into my time. If there are any questions to me, then I would like to spend this time for questions. If no, there are a couple of more things I can tell you about.
So you mentioned this was targeted for a version 3.
Yes.
There's still a version 2. Whatever that's sort of another trunk of
2.2 is planned for release. Code freeze for 2.2 is around 1st of August, if I'm not mistaken. Then it's about 3 months for release. And then I hope that community would finally get more time to switch over to Foswiki 3.
Okay, yeah, that's my question. I assume the 2 will coexist for some period of time. But is 3 out yet? Or that's...
It's totally, if you want to play with it, you can take the active branch, which is item 14237. It's sorry for cryptic name, but that's how Foswiki tracks changes through tasking system. By the way, as I told, for those who don't know, Foswiki doesn't use any external bug tracking. There is internal task management system which is built purely on Foswiki code. There is not, as far as I remember, there is no even plugins are used for that purpose. And it works. Plugins not, but the script, yes, because it also tracks GitHub commits on a task. But yes, there is, I hope that Foswiki 3 would eventually be out because, well, this is my dream. And it's 2.5 years of my life, actually. Okay, any more questions? Sorry, okay, if anybody of you wants to join Foswiki development for any reason, you can contact me with this email. You can use IRC, Foswiki.org. And I was changing my presentation at the last moment, and I forgot to put back my acknowledges to all the Foswiki community, to all the great people there. Because without their help, nothing would happen. Unfortunately, as it was told today about Perl itself, that Perl popularity is declining, so declining the number of developers for Foswiki as well. Unfortunately, it's only a few of us left, and frankly saying, if nobody joins Foswiki within next half a year, I'm very much afraid that project would simply die. So, okay. Now a little bit extra. So how much time do I left?
A little over.
5 minutes. Okay. For those of you who was here, for any of you who was attending this conference last year, I hope you've also been to Damian's presentation, where he was speaking about the infrastructure code and how he hates it. I share his hatred completely. So another problem with Foswiki, current Foswiki, is that it's called eclectic not because of the mixture of different styles, but also because it's really different programming styles. And a lot of begin blocks are there only to impose, for example, to apply locale, to apply the minimal Perl version, and stuff like that. So I hope it's readable, because I forgot to make it bigger. Anyway, what's important here is this is how typical new code would look in Foswiki when I started with the project. You see, we use 5.14, Foswiki types, we use move, we use namespace clean, we extend Foswiki object, but this one wouldn't be gone, and we apply 2 roles. And overall, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 active lines. And this is how it looks with a special module for Foswiki class, which imposes the common styling for Foswiki. So all we need is use Foswiki class. -up means apply app object application, meaning that this class would require an existing application object, and it can, this class, object of this class can exist only within active application environment. Types, instead of Foswiki types, this is to use type tiny. And callbacks. Callbacks is a little bit special. I'll get back to it later, maybe, if we get time. The problem with Foswiki class is that some people complain that, you create some magic and magic is bad. May paraphrase it, may change this meaning. It's bad when it's undocumented. Well-documented magic becomes, how to put it, becomes a production code. Let's put it this way. So it helps, as I told you, it helps to unify code style. It improves readability. So instead of analyzing what code you have, what classes you apply, you simply read through single line of Foswiki class and see what roles this class are supposed to implement. It helps in debugging. The way it helps, for example, Mu lacks capability of recording what attributes are created on an object. You cannot track them. So if you get something lost on your object, or if any third-party code stored something on your object in the hash key, you cannot find it later by comparing to what attributes are created. So Foswiki class takes this function on itself, and it registers all attributes declared with has. Another debugging thing, its recent introduction actually, I started using type tiny, but it slows down code by about 30% on average. So we only need it for debugging, but not for the production. To make things easier, I simply added another option for has, which is called assert, and which activates either checks only in debugging and testing mode. That's it. When you go to production, the assert simply, it disappears. Documented. And basically, it all fits into just a couple of lines of code, 600 lines of code, again, with documentation. So if you need to find out something, you can always easily find it. So 1 minute left. I think Scheherazade must end her talks. Thank you very much, everybody. Once again, it was my pleasure to talk to you.